Yo, what's going on everybody? It's Dom from Lensprotogo and Lens Rentals. Welcome back to the channel. So over the next two videos, we're going to be checking out both lenses in this Pictor Zoom Cine Zoom lens set from our friends over at DZOFilm, who, by the way, have been churning out some really impressive pieces of cine glass recently, and like, no spoilers or anything, but these Pictor Zooms seem like they definitely do not fall short of that standard that DZO has set so far, which is pretty great looking cinema glass at an even greater price. So this week we're going to be checking out the tighter zoom of this lens set, the 50-125 T2.8, and then next week we're going to dive into the 20-55 T2.8 as well. So if you did some quick math there, you might have just realized that there's a little bit of an overlap in the focal lengths between this set, but both lenses in this set in total give you coverage from 20 to 125 millimeters, all at T2.8, and this set costs about $5,400, I'm pretty sure. So in the grand scheme of things, that's actually really affordable when you're talking about a Cine Zoom lens set. Just for quick comparison, the Sigma Cine Zooms, which is an 18-35 and a 50-100, that's like an $8,500 cinema lens set, but also those are T2 throughout the whole range. So kind of different, but good comparison to let you know like how expensive some of these Cine Zooms can be and how low DZO is keeping the price for this particular set. So really appreciated there. Anyways, now we're going to be checking out the build of this lens and its physical traits, and then we're going to check out some test footage I was able to get with this lens on the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro, so we can see some of the characteristics of this lens for ourselves at both ends of its focal length range from 50 to 125. So today I obviously have the 50 to 125 millimeter Pictor Zoom in EF mount, but interestingly enough, these Pictor Zooms actually have an interchangeable lens mount that is super easy to do by yourself. So the lens mount is just an extra bit of housing that screws on and off the rear element like so. And they managed to keep everything pretty uniform even after a mount change, according to this page on the Pictor Zoom products page, which says that the PL and EF mounts have different flange distances, although this doesn't affect the close focus distance of the lens, which is 2 feet 8 inches or 0.8 meters. As an EF mount, the lens weighs 3.75 pounds and is about 7.5 inches long in total. It comes off the lens mount about 7.25 inches. It comes with a pretty bulky lens support under here that is removable, and this is always nice. Both lenses in this set have a front filter thread, but it is a less common size of 86 millimeters though, so just something to keep in mind in there. But that's really nice to have for thread-on filters though. But alternatively, each of these Pictor Zooms have this little bump up at the end that brings it up to that 95 millimeter barrel diameter, making them that much more compatible with a lot of your matte box options out there. Otherwise, the barrel is a bit thinner than that. It just comes out a bit at the end there for that very purpose, I'm pretty sure, which is pretty neat. Other than that, it's got a pretty straight up Cine Zoom lens design. Shape-wise, the width of this lens sort of tapers down to the lens mount pretty gradually. And aesthetically, we have those focal lengths standing out here in large text and in white, while everything else is in this sort of highlighter yellow color. On the focus ring, they split up the standard and imperial measurements on each side of the gear, which is a design choice for sure. Feet are on the outer side, while the meters are on the slightly smaller inside. And the focus ring has the perfect amount of resistance. It's enough for subtle focus changes on a small scale, but also not too much to prevent you from changing focus really fast. And it rotates just over 270 degrees from infinity to close focus. The zoom ring has a bit more resistance to it, making it even smoother to throw, and the focal lengths are shown in 5 millimeter increments from 50 millimeters to 125. Also, there are 4 threads all around the zoom ring to attach a little zoom knob onto the lens if you want. Finally, closest to the lens mount is the iris ring, which has even more resistance, allowing for a nice controlled pull all the way from T2.8 to T22. And now's a good time to talk about what's going on inside this lens. We have a 16 aperture blade diaphragm at work here, and this is going to keep that bokeh circular throughout the whole iris range, as opposed to creating hard geometries like what's seen sometimes around f5.6 and f8. And we'll see plenty of examples of the bokeh quality of this lens from a quick lens test that I'm about to roll, but we're also going to see examples of how this lens and the 20-55 as well remain parfocal. So by optical design, changing the focal length value on the lens, aka zooming in or out, will have no effect on the focus whatsoever. And similarly, this lens also maintains focus breathing really well, which is kind of like the opposite problem. All right, so now we're going to check out some of those tests I was able to do here in the studio with the 50-125 T2.8 Pictor Zoom, the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro, and also my good buddy Kyle, who helped us out with these tests. You ready to do this thing? Okay, here is our quick characteristic test. We have our friend Kyle at about 4.5 feet away from camera. The string of blue lights behind him are hung up right at our backdrop here. And I have a small Fresnel style LED light back there as well with a very narrow beam that's directed right at the lens to create a prominent flare. Out of focus in the foreground is a red LED light clamped down to a quarter at this lens's close focus distance of 2 feet 8 inches or 0.8 meters. We're currently seeing the 50mm end of the zoom at T2.8, but I'll mix in a few side-by-sides with a matching T4 shot to see the comparison, and then we'll check out 125mm. At 1.4 meters focus, we're getting a very nice amount of pop from our backdrop, which isn't that much further away, and the bokehs appear to maintain a circular shape until they creep towards the edges, then they start to squish, and eventually they get cut off. And this is exaggerated as the focus plane gets closer and closer. The direct lens flare behaves a lot like the Sigma Cines in my opinion. It has a few greenish reflections opposite from the source, but they are soft and not too distracting. It does create a bit of a beam, but it's not loaded with the reflections of each and every element like in wider focal lengths, though it's subtle. This lens has a neat little indirect flare as well when the source is about 10 to 15 degrees or so out of frame. You'll see that when it creeps out, it sort of pops out a few colorful flares. There's a quick green one, little magenta burst, little sensor reflection with a big magenta pop, and then it does this increasingly warm creep out where it blooms and blooms and blooms and then dies out as it turns into like a deep fiery red. There's that indirect flare in reverse, which will turn into the direct flare, and also now is a good time to notice the complete lack of distortion as the subject gets to the edge of the frame, although barrel distortion isn't such a concern at this focal length range. I'll probably do a specific test for that in the 20-55, which is the wider lens in the set, next week. Here's the difference between wide open T2.8 and T4, and aside from the obvious exposure change, you can tell that taking the next stop down tames things down quite a bit. It decreases the size of the bokehs, but it also gives them no chance of being cut off at the edge of frame like what was happening at T2.8. T4 also maintains much more contrast in the lens flare area, and you'll notice that the flare doesn't quite have that extra bloomage. So this tells you right here that that can be subdued a bit if you want, just by stopping down. Here's the entire aperture range, and really the only thing to note here is the starburst sort of shape that the light source takes as we get past like the T11 zone. All right, before we switch to the 125mm focal length test, here are a few quick shots that demonstrate this lens's parfocality. As I go through its entire zoom range, you'll see that the focus plane does not change whatsoever. And this is also a good demonstration to help you notice how the bokehs change and the lens flares bloom when zooming in and out on this lens. All right, moving on to the tighter end of this cine zoom. At 125mm, we're basically going to be seeing everything we saw on the 50mm, just exaggerated. Larger bokehs, larger lens flares, but there are some downsides to this too, like the bokehs are much more likely to cat eye at this focal length, and those larger flares aren't always desired. The distance is adjusted as well. Our subject is now 11.5 feet away from the camera now, but the quarter at close focus distance has remained the same at 2.8 feet away from camera. And this is actually what causes the little bite out of the bokehs on the left side of the frame here. That's just the quarter in the foreground. You'll notice that creates a massive foreground bokeh with that quarter hardly becoming legible until we focus way, way closer. Here at close focus, you can see that the bokehs in the background got humongous, but also a little wonky looking and a little cat eye-ish. Also here you can sort of notice how the highlight roll-off sort of slips off the source in these funny twisting blooms that even have a sort of strange like rainbow moire as I pan across the frame here. Back at 11.5 feet focus, we see an even more pronounced pop from the background, as everything slips out of focus from our subject's face and into a creamy, obfuscated background, which is really pleasing. And again, everything just gets much more tame at T4. The bokehs shrink, but also form into more shapely circles and get cut off a bit less. Also, the lens flare is much more subdued at T4 and retains more detail. It eliminates this whole like golden glare that you get here on the bottom right of the frame when the lens is wide open. And again, here is the whole aperture range at 125mm. All right, that's pretty much going to do it for those lens tests. So now let's quickly review what we learned today about this 50 to 125 T2.8 Pictor Zoom from DZOFilm, knowing that next week we're going to be checking out the wider zoom in this set the 20 to 55. So the 50 to 125 T2.8 Pictor Zoom is a pretty straight down the pipe lens, and I'd say it's just about everything you'd want in a cine zoom lens, but at a way more affordable price compared to some of the other options out there. Yes, the Sigma Cine Zoom equivalent of this lens is a very low light friendly T2, but its focal length range is only 50 to 100, giving you that 2x magnification. Although I hardly ever think about zoom lenses in terms of magnification. But anyways, that's only a 2x magnification, where with this 50 to 125, you are getting that 2.5 times magnification. But again, I have to remind you that these are T2.8 lenses, where those Sigma Cines are a consistent T2. So in a lot of ways, you could compare each lens in this set to the Sigma Cine Zooms, but also they are not that comparable in a lot of ways. They kind of went different directions with these lenses. One of those differences is obviously the price. Alone, this is a $2,700 Cine Zoom lens, but its Sigma competitor, which is probably one of the closest things to this, is a clean $1,000 more. So this is a huge undercut in price when you're directly comparing it to those, but once again, they're not really directly comparable. At T2.8 though, that is decently fast, and those 16 iris blades smooth out the bokehs really well. They hardly ever form a hard geometry, and the focus falls off really nicely. That thread on the front is really handy, and that 95mm barrel diameter and geared rings make it very compatible with cine lens accessories, matte boxes, fizz units. So again, it really seems like this 50 to 125 is going to do everything that you want it to do. And don't be fooled by the price. It is significantly cheaper than a lot of the other options out there, but they did not skimp on optical quality. It's got a sophisticated design that's decently fast at T2.8 throughout. It's lightweight, and it looks consistent across its entire zoom range in more than one way. Okay, so that's pretty much going to do it on this video, covering the 50 to 125 Pictor Zoom from DZOFilm. So as always, if you have any questions about this lens or any of the tests you saw, like maybe any of the parameters or camera specs, which are all in the description by the way, drop a comment in the comment section below and we'll start a discussion. And that also includes any suggestions you have for next week's video on the wider of the lenses in this set, the 20 to 55mm. Also, if you happen to like this video, hit it with the thumbs up button down below to let me know you liked it. And also, if you're not already, subscribe to the channel. And that way, you'll be in the loop whenever we post new content, which is every week. So take care, and we'll see you in the next one.